In a picturesque college town where life felt as serene as the rolling hills surrounding it, 4 promising young lives were extinguished in one chilling night. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, bright, ambitious, and full of life, were brutally murdered in their sleep. The crime, silent and calculated, left no signs of forced entry, no immediate suspects, and one haunting question: who could commit such an unspeakable act? Moscow, Idaho, a town of quiet streets and warm welcomes, where crime seemed like an afterthought. At the heart of this peaceful community stands the University of Idaho, a vibrant hub for students chasing their dreams. For Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, this was home. It was where lifelong friendships were forged, where love blossomed, and where futures were planned. Kaylee and Madison, best friends since childhood, were inseparable. Kaylee's determination and ambition matched Madison's warmth and charisma, creating a bond that felt unbreakable. Xana, with her bright personality and independent streak, found happiness in her relationship with Ethan, a kind-hearted athlete who loved his family and friends deeply. But on November 13th, 2022, their shared house, a place of comfort and laughter, became the site of an unthinkable crime. The 4 students were found brutally murdered, their lives cut short in the very space they should have felt safest. There was no sign of forced entry, no obvious motive, and no immediate answers. The news spread like wildfire, plunging the tight-knit community into shock and grief. Vigils lit up the night as friends, family, and strangers gathered to mourn the loss of lives filled with so much promise. Fear gripped the town as questions swirled. Was the killer still among them? Could this happen again? As investigators began their search for the truth, one thing became painfully clear. The answer to who and why would uncover a darkness that no one in Moscow ever imagined. The silence that followed the tragedy on King Road was deafening. A small college town, known for its tight-knit community and idyllic charm, now grappled with the unthinkable, the violent deaths of 4 young students. As the news spread, it became clear that this was more than just a crime scene. It was a profound loss for an entire community. To understand the weight of what was taken that night, we must first look at the lives behind the headlines. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen were inseparable, best friends since early childhood. Together they had navigated the challenges of growing up, from elementary school mishaps to high school milestones. Kaylee, the outgoing and fiercely ambitious one, was a senior on the cusp of graduating. Her plans included moving to Texas, starting a career, and embracing the opportunities life had to offer. Friends describe her as a firecracker, someone who brought energy, laughter, and a sense of purpose to every room she entered. Madison, affectionately called Maddie, complemented Kaylee's bold personality with her own steady, caring nature. Maddie's warmth and charisma made her beloved by everyone who knew her. She was studying marketing, with dreams of building a career that allowed her to connect with people on a deep level. Together, Kaylee and Maddie were like 2 sides of the same coin, one adventurous and daring, the other grounded and nurturing. Their bond was unbreakable, and their friendship had always been a source of strength for both. Xana Kernodle was known for her independent spirit and vibrant personality. A junior at the University of Idaho, Xana balanced her studies with a part-time job at a local restaurant, a testament to her determination and work ethic. Friends described Xana as someone who could brighten any situation with her quick wit and infectious laugh. She was a loyal friend and a natural leader who made everyone around her feel valued. Ethan Chapin, Xana's boyfriend, was equally unforgettable. A freshman and an athlete, Ethan was one of 3 siblings in a close-knit family. He was known for his easygoing demeanor and ability to make people feel at ease. Friends and teammates often spoke of his generosity and sense of humor. Ethan and Xana's relationship was full of joy and mutual support, like a partnership that stood out as both genuine and inspiring. Through interviews with family, friends, and professors, the documentary brings these personalities to life. We see photos of Kaylee and Maddie laughing on road trips, Xana serving customers at her job, and Ethan goofing off with his siblings. These were not just victims of a crime. They were sons, daughters, siblings, and best friends. Their potential and their light were stolen in a single horrific act. November 12th, 2022. began as a typical Saturday for college students in Moscow. The town bustled with activity as students celebrated the weekend with friends. For Kaylee and Maddie, the evening started with a visit to a popular local bar. They were seen later at a nearby food truck, chatting with other students and enjoying the night. Surveillance footage captured their final moments, laughing, smiling, and seemingly carefree. Meanwhile, Xana and Ethan attended a fraternity party on campus. They returned home to the King Road residence sometime after midnight. The house, shared by the 4 victims and 2 other roommates, had always been a safe and welcoming space. It was a home filled with laughter, late-night talks, and the closeness that only comes from the unique bond of college housemates. By 2 a.m., all 4 were back in the house. The 2 surviving roommates, who had also been out that night, were asleep in their own rooms. The house grew quiet as its occupants settled in for the night, a stark contrast to the vibrant energy that had filled it hours earlier. But in the early hours of November 13th, everything changed. The details of what unfolded inside that house remained chilling. The attack was calculated and silent, leaving no signs of struggle or forced entry. 4 lives were taken in a manner so brutal that seasoned investigators would later describe the scene as one of the most horrific they had ever encountered. The discovery of the crime sent shockwaves through the town. When the 911 call was placed late the next morning, it reported an unconscious person. What law enforcement found upon arrival defied even their worst expectations. The realization that 4 young people had been murdered in their sleep left the small community reeling. As the news broke, vigils were quickly organized. Candles flickered in the night as hundreds of students and locals gathered to mourn. The University of Idaho cancelled classes, offering grief counseling to students struggling to process the tragedy. News cameras captured raw emotions, tears streaming down faces, embraces between strangers, and the haunting sound of silence where laughter once filled the campus. Parents flooded their children's phones with calls, urging them to lock their doors and stay safe. For a town like Moscow, where many residents hadn't thought twice about leaving their homes unlocked, this new reality was almost impossible to comprehend. The fear was palpable, and one question was on everyone's mind. Was the killer still out there? As Moscow came to terms with its devastating loss, law enforcement faced an even more daunting challenge, piecing together the evidence of a crime that seemed to have left no trace. Who was responsible for such a heinous act? And how would investigators even begin to untangle this chilling mystery? The town of Moscow was paralyzed with grief and fear. As residents locked their doors and students stayed home, law enforcement faced the daunting task of unraveling a crime that seemed to defy explanation. 4 lives were lost, but no clear answers had emerged. For investigators, the pressure was mounting, and the clock was ticking. When law enforcement arrived at the King Road residence on November 13, 2022, they were met with a crime scene that offered few immediate clues. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious motive, and no clear evidence pointing to a suspect. The nature of the attack was brutal and methodical, leaving investigators to conclude that this was no random act of violence. It was personal, deliberate, and chillingly calculated. From the outset, the lack of a clear suspect posed significant challenges. The house had been a hub of activity for the victims and their friends, with visitors coming and going regularly. This made it difficult to establish who had been there in the days leading up to the murders, and who might have had access to the property. Investigators meticulously combed through the scene, collecting DNA samples, fingerprints, and any potential evidence that could provide a lead. Complicating the investigation was the overwhelming flood of tips and rumors. Within days of the crime, police received thousands of calls, emails, and messages from concerned citizens, amateur sleuths, and armchair detectives. While some tips provided useful insights, many were based on speculation or misinformation, leading investigators down dead ends and wasting valuable time. Adding to the challenge was the intense media scrutiny. The case gained national attention almost immediately, with reporters descending on Moscow to cover the story. Every move by law enforcement was analyzed and dissected, with the public demanding updates and answers. The pressure to deliver results while maintaining the integrity of the investigation was immense, creating a tense and high-stakes environment for the team working the case. In the absence of definitive answers, speculation began to fill the void. Theories about the identity and motive of the killer spread rapidly, both within Moscow and across social media. Some believed the crime had to have been committed by someone the victims knew. The lack of forced entry suggested that the killer either had access to the house or was let in willingly. Friends and acquaintances were questioned, and investigators scrutinized the victims' relationships for any signs of conflict or tension. Others argued that the attack might have been a random act of violence. This theory struck fear into the community, as it implied that the killer could strike again. The randomness of such an act would make finding the perpetrator even more difficult, leaving residents to wonder if the person responsible could be walking among them. A third, more chilling theory linked the murders to other unsolved crimes. Could this be the work of a serial killer? The calculated nature of the attack and the sheer brutality suggested a level of familiarity with violence, leading some to speculate that this wasn't the killer's first crime. Social media played a significant role in fueling these theories. Platforms like Reddit, Twitter, and TikTok became hotbeds of speculation, with users analyzing everything from the layout of the house to the victim's final movements. While some efforts were well-intentioned, others veered into dangerous territory, with innocent individuals being accused and harassed based on unfounded claims. This misinformation not only complicated the investigation, but also added to the emotional toll on the victims' families. Despite the noise, investigators continued their work, sifting through the chaos in search of solid leads. After weeks of painstaking effort, a breakthrough finally came. Investigators discovered DNA evidence at the crime scene, providing a crucial clue that would become the foundation of their case. The DNA, while not an immediate match to any profiles in national databases, suggested that the killer had left behind a piece of themselves, something that could eventually lead to their identification. Another significant lead emerged in the form of surveillance footage. Cameras from a nearby neighborhood captured a white Hyundai Elantra passing by the King Road residence around the time of the murders. While the vehicle itself didn't provide direct evidence, it became a focal point for investigators. They issued a public request for information about the car, sparking a renewed wave of tips and inquiries. Behind the scenes, law enforcement was meticulously piecing together a timeline of events. Cell phone data, credit card records, and other digital breadcrumbs began to reveal a chilling narrative. The killer had likely been watching the house, studying the victims, and planning the attack for days or even weeks. This was no impulsive act. It was premeditated, deliberate, and executed with precision. The combination of DNA evidence and the identification of the vehicle provided investigators with the momentum they desperately needed. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, painting a picture of a calculated and obsessive individual. As investigators closed in on their suspect, the evidence revealed a chilling portrait of a killer who had blended into the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But one question remained. Who was the person behind this trail of evidence, and what drove them to commit such an unspeakable act? As the pieces of evidence came together, the image of the suspect grew clearer. The DNA, the cell phone records, and the surveillance footage of the white Hyundai Elantra all pointed to one man. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, investigators were about to close in on the person they believed was responsible for the brutal murders that had gripped Moscow and the nation. On December 30th, 2022, the silence of a quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood was shattered as a team of law enforcement officers surrounded a modest home. Inside, they arrested Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD student studying criminology at Washington State University, just 10 miles from Moscow. The arrest was the culmination of weeks of painstaking investigative work that began with a series of small but critical breaks in the case. The DNA evidence recovered at the crime scene had been the first major breakthrough. While the DNA itself did not initially match anyone in the National CODIS database, investigators worked tirelessly to build a profile. Using genetic genealogy, They traced the DNA back to Kohberger's family tree, a process that required intense focus and collaboration with forensic experts. Cell phone records further solidified their suspicions. Data showed that Kohberger's phone had pinged in the vicinity of the victim's house on multiple occasions, both before and after the murders. This was a chilling detail. It suggested that he had been stalking the area, possibly surveilling the victims and planning the attack well in advance. The white Hyundai Elantra captured on surveillance footage became the final puzzle piece. Law enforcement tracked down vehicles matching the description and eventually connected the car to Kohberger. The Elantra, parked outside his parents' home in Pennsylvania at the time of his arrest, was seized and became a key piece of evidence in the case. The arrest itself was dramatic and strategic. Authorities had been monitoring Kohberger's movements for days, ensuring they had enough evidence to secure a warrant. When the time came, they moved swiftly, entering the home under the cover of darkness and taking Kohberger into custody without incident. The revelation of Bryan Kohberger as the suspect sent shockwaves through the nation. On the surface, he appeared to be an ordinary graduate student, a criminology PhD candidate at Washington State University, who was described as intelligent and highly focused. But as investigators and the public began to dig deeper, a far more unsettling picture emerged. Kohberger's academic background was steeped in the study of crime. He had earned a master's degree in criminal justice and was pursuing advanced research on the psychology of criminals. Some of his work included studies on decision-making in violent crimes, raising disturbing questions about whether his education had been used not to understand crime, but to commit it. Former classmates and acquaintances described Kohberger as an odd and sometimes unsettling figure. Reports surfaced about his fascination with serial killers and his cold, analytical demeanor. In one of the most chilling details, it was revealed that Kohberger had posted surveys on online forums, asking participants to describe their thoughts and emotions during the commission of a crime. These surveys, presented under the guise of academic research, now appeared to reflect a darker curiosity. Neighbors and colleagues noted a change in Kohberger's behavior after the murders. Some described him as more withdrawn, while others recalled moments where he seemed almost boastful, as if he were confident he wouldn't be caught. The juxtaposition of his outward appearance as a dedicated student and the horrifying accusations against him created a portrait of a man whose true nature had remained hidden in plain sight. The arrest of Bryan Kohberger brought a mix of relief and renewed fear to the community of Moscow. For weeks, residents had lived in uncertainty, locking their doors and avoiding the streets at night. The announcement of a suspect in custody eased some of that tension, but it also reignited debates about the safety of small towns and the trustworthiness of those who seemed ordinary. Across the nation, the case sparked a broader conversation about how someone like Kohberger, educated, articulate, and seemingly accomplished, could commit such a heinous act. Experts weighed in, discussing the psychology of individuals who live double lives and the potential warning signs that are often overlooked. Social media erupted with discussions and speculation. Some questioned how Kohberger had managed to evade detection for so long, while others focused on the chilling details of his alleged behavior before and after the murders. For the victims' families, the arrest marked a significant step toward justice, but it also brought new questions. Why had their loved ones been targeted? And what would the next chapter of the case reveal? As Bryan Kohberger awaited trial, the evidence against him began to mount. But for the families and the community, one question loomed larger than all others. Would the justice system deliver the answers they so desperately sought? And could anyone truly understand what drove a man to commit such a monstrous act? Bryan Kohberger's arrest was a significant milestone, but it was just the beginning. The road to justice was far from straightforward. For the victims' families, the arrest offered some solace, but the legal proceedings would bring its own emotional challenges. Meanwhile, the nation watched as the details of the case began to unfold in the courtroom, exposing both the strength of the evidence and the complexities of the legal process. The prosecution's case against Bryan Kohberger centered on three key pieces of evidence: DNA, surveillance footage, and cell phone records. These elements, meticulously pieced together by investigators, created a compelling narrative of guilt. The DNA evidence was the cornerstone of the case. Prosecutors presented findings that Kohberger's DNA was found on a sheath of a knife recovered at the crime scene. This single detail, they argued, placed him directly at the scene of the murders. Forensic experts testified about the process of identifying the DNA and linking it back to Kohberger through genetic genealogy, a groundbreaking method that had been used in other high-profile cases. The defense, however, challenged the chain of custody for the DNA evidence, raising questions about whether it could have been contaminated or improperly handled. Surveillance footage played a crucial role in building the timeline. A white Hyundai Elantra, matching the description of Kohberger's car, was captured driving near the victim's residence around the time of the murders. This footage, combined with witness testimonies, painted a picture of a suspect who had been stalking the area. However, the lack of direct footage showing Kohberger entering or leaving the house left room for doubt, which his defense team seized upon. Cell phone records further tied Kohberger to the scene. Data showed that his phone had pinged in the vicinity of the King Road residence on multiple occasions before the night of the murders, suggesting that he had been surveilling the victims. On the night of the murders, the phone was turned off for several hours, a detail the prosecution argued was an attempt to avoid detection. Still, the defense pointed out that proximity alone did not prove intent, and they questioned whether the evidence was circumstantial rather than definitive. One of the most contentious elements of the case was the lack of the murder weapon. Despite exhaustive searches, the knife used in the killings was never recovered. The prosecution framed this as evidence of Kohberger's calculated efforts to conceal his crime, while the defense argued that without the weapon, there was no concrete proof tying him to the murders. Legal experts weighed in on the case, with some praising the prosecution's ability to weave a compelling narrative from the available evidence, while others noted the challenges posed by gaps in the case. Was the evidence enough to secure a conviction? Or would the defense successfully cast doubt on the prosecution's argument? Bryan Kohberger's legal team approached the case with a clear strategy, sowing doubt in the minds of the jury. Their arguments focused on questioning the reliability of the evidence and the investigative process itself. The defense highlighted potential weaknesses in the DNA evidence, arguing that the knife sheath could have been contaminated or planted. They emphasized the lack of other physical evidence, such as fingerprints or footprints, tying Kohberger to the crime scene. This, they suggested, created reasonable doubt about his involvement. They also targeted the surveillance footage, pointing out that while the Hyundai Elantra was a critical piece of evidence, it was not conclusive proof of guilt. The defense questioned whether the vehicle could have belonged to someone else, noting that thousands of similar cars were registered in the area. One of the most controversial moments in the trial came when the defense suggested alternative suspects. They pointed to the lack of evidence excluding other individuals and hinted at potential bias in the investigation. This strategy drew criticism from legal experts who argued that it risked undermining the credibility of the defense's case. Throughout the trial, Kohberger's demeanor became a subject of scrutiny. Observers noted his calm and emotionless expression, which some interpreted as arrogance and others as composure. This behavior became a point of discussion in the media, fueling speculation about his state of mind and the potential motivations behind the crime. For the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, the trial was a harrowing experience. Each day in court brought new details about the murders, forcing them to relive the trauma of their loss. Statements from family members revealed the profound pain they had endured, their grief compounded by the public nature of the case. During the victim impact statements, parents and siblings spoke of the futures stolen from their loved ones. They shared memories of laughter, dreams, and the small moments that made each victim unique. These statements served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of the crime, grounding the trial in the reality of the loss suffered by the families and the community. Moscow itself continued to grapple with the aftermath of the murders. The case had shattered the town's sense of safety, leaving residents with lingering fear and uncertainty. The trial became a focal point for the community, with many attending proceedings or following updates closely. While the arrest and trial offered some hope for justice, the emotional scars left by the murders remained raw. As the trial unfolded, the evidence against Kohberger mounted, but so too did the questions about what really happened that night. Would the prosecution's case be enough to secure a conviction? And would the truth about the Idaho murders finally come to light? The trial had taken its toll, not just on the families of the victims, but on the entire community of Moscow. As the world awaited a verdict, the weight of the case was evident in every corner of the town. Justice was not only about punishment, but also about finding closure for a wound that might never truly heal. After weeks of testimony, arguments, and emotionally charged moments in the courtroom, the verdict was finally delivered. Bryan Kohberger was found guilty on all counts, with the prosecution's evidence proving too compelling for the jury to ignore. The DNA evidence on the knife sheath, the surveillance footage of the white Hyundai Elantra, and the cell phone records pointing to his presence near the victim's home all came together in a damning mosaic that the defense could not dismantle. For the families of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, the verdict brought a bittersweet sense of justice. Their loved ones were gone, and nothing could bring them back. But knowing that the person responsible would face consequences provided some measure of peace. Victim impact statements in the courtroom echoed this sentiment. Parents and siblings spoke of the void left behind and the unshakable grief that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The town of Moscow, too, reacted with a mixture of relief and reflection. For weeks, the trial had gripped the community, becoming a focal point of conversation and concern. The verdict brought an end to a chapter that had left an indelible mark on the town's identity. But for many, it also raised questions about the justice system, safety, and how such a tragedy could have occurred in the first place. Yet, the conclusion of the trial was not the end of the story. Even as Bryan Kohberger faced life behind bars, unanswered questions lingered. The first and most haunting was whether he had acted alone. While the prosecution's case centered on Kohberger as the sole perpetrator, the meticulous planning and execution of the crime led some to wonder if others had been involved, whether directly or indirectly. Had Kohberger confided in anyone? Was there an accomplice who had helped him in some capacity? Or had he truly carried out the murders entirely on his own? Another difficult question was whether this tragedy could have been prevented. Some pointed to warning signs in Kohberger's past, his fascination with crime, his increasingly erratic behavior, as red flags that might have gone unnoticed or ignored. Was there a missed opportunity to intervene before his obsession turned deadly? The case also highlighted vulnerabilities in small-town communities like Moscow. The sense of safety and trust that had defined the town was shattered, leaving residents to grapple with the uncomfortable reality that evil could exist even in the most idyllic places. How could Moscow rebuild that trust and ensure such a tragedy never happened again? The Idaho murders became more than just a criminal case. They served as a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the unexpected darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary places. For the families of the victims, the journey toward healing would be long and difficult. Grief counselors and community leaders worked tirelessly to support those affected, offering resources and spaces to process the trauma. Experts reflected on the broader implications of the case. It raised critical questions about personal safety, the role of social media in modern investigations, and how small towns could adapt to changing times while maintaining their sense of community. The trial also reinforced the importance of forensic science, with tools like genetic genealogy and digital tracking playing pivotal roles in solving the case. For the community of Moscow, rebuilding meant finding ways to honor the memories of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. Scholarships were established in their names, candlelight vigils continued to be held on anniversaries, and murals appeared around town, ensuring that their lives would never be forgotten. The Idaho murders remind us that life is both precious and fragile, and that even the safest of places can harbor unimaginable darkness. As we seek justice, as we try to heal, we must also remember. Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan were more than victims. They were bright lights extinguished far too soon. Their story will remain a part of Moscow forever, a testament to resilience in the face of tragedy and the enduring hope that justice, though imperfect, can prevail.
Hey, before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join our amazing community and stay connected with fresh content every single day. It's free, it's easy, and it guarantees you'll never miss out on the stories, insights, and adventures we share. So go ahead, click subscribe, and let's make every day unforgettable together.